Thank you to One Protein Bars for sponsoring this episode. You can find One Protein Bars at a retailer near you or on Amazon.com.
And we will be telling you about some of our favorite flavors later in the episode. I'm Claire Parker.
And I'm Ashley Hamilton. And this is Celebrity Memoir Book Club, the podcast where we read the books and say, this isn't even crazy. We'll sound crazy talking about it, though. And if you want to read the book and say, well, I need to judge it for myself, well, go ahead, my friend. But if you want to just hear our take instead, well, you've come to the right place.
So up top, we're going to do a trigger warning, a double trigger warning. Trigger one.
Trigger one, no John Mulaney.
That's not, okay, so 3 trigger warnings. Do you have any more you want to get out of your system?
Yes, trigger 2, animal health issues. I had a really hard time with that part.
4 trigger warnings. Trigger 3, this whole book takes place while she is in a psychiatric hospital, and she is there for suicidal ideation, self-harm. She doesn't even really claim an eating disorder.
She does claim, she says, I was there for an eating disorder. She just never mentions any of the treatment for that.
Yeah, I think she might still be in it. They get there and they go, this is the least of your problems. And I guess other things. So if that is going to be hard for you, I'd back out now. Trigger 4. We at this podcast believe just because you use words like suicidal ideation and self-harm does not mean that your book is automatically good. Unfortunately, this was a book that did not open my eyes to the greatness of Marie Tendler. We stand pretty firm in our convictions that she sucks. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, but I just feel like we're not far enough past the trigger warning to go there yet.
We're 4 deep, Ashley. I mean, trigger. I don't know. Get it. It's a podcast. Turn it off. If you're being cyberbullied, walk away from the computer. At some point, if this is hurting you, you must save yourself and unplug your headphones.
I have to say, years ago, we became what we claim as the foremost Olivia Munn historians on the internet, as the only 2 people on the internet who had read her book.
Like a Greek myth. I did not want that fate, and yet it befell upon me.
And I do believe this book is our punishment. Karma has come back to haunt us. And that karmic revenge is that we had to read this book that repelled me for days. I sat and I stared at it like that animal in Harry Potter, we were not allowed to look them in the eyes?
No.
Okay. Well, there was one. and that was this book. I was just repelled by it. I couldn't handle it. And then we had to read it, and now we have to discuss it. And I think it's just like a tough thing to discuss because it is just so bad, but it's tough subject matter.
I rushed through it. I actually had no problem reading it.
Oh, my eyes were rolling so far into the back of my head. I said, but the words are on the front of your head. You have to keep them forward.
I read it in like 4 hours. I felt it was very zoomy. If you're interested, you'll get through it very quickly. It's a great beach read, I'd say.
This is not a good beach read.
Listen, people are allowed to have different opinions, Ashley.
Okay.
That being said,
what do you guys do at the beach?
That being said,
I like to laugh.
Some people like to cry.
Okay.
Some people do funerals at the beach.
Interesting.
I did, however, feel that what Marie Tendler needs is just a little slap in the face and a job. And I think that would have cured a lot of the problems. Anyway, here we go. I guess before we get going, we should be vulnerable ourselves. Ashley?
Yeah?
If your life was a memoir and this week was a chapter, what would the title be and pourquoi?
It would be called You Reap What You Fucking Sow, You Dumb Bitch.
Lessons learned. Did I not say this is the year of learning lessons?
This is the year of learning lessons.
I can't believe we're just stumbling on this one now.
I guess mark this right now. If we come back to these problemos, I guess I'll be diagnosed with can't learn a lesson disease. But hopefully not, I feel like I've spent a lot of time just like yammering about how being old is no problem. And then I was at the gym today and I felt a tinge and I said, ooh, is that me? And then I was walking home, and because I've become rickety, I walked on a diagonal right into a fence and scraped my leg. And it was bleeding, and I was walking past a group of kids who were just like looking at me, and one of them was like staring directly into my blood spot. And I was like, please, I don't mean to traumatize. And then I had to go home and pick up this traumatizing ass book. That's my punishment for being a bitch on the internet sometimes. And I feel very much like I talk too big of a game for my weak little life.
That's so true. Do you remember when I systematically debunked your self-mythology that you never get sick?
No, it's still true. I don't remember that because I've actually never been sick. However, I've gotten the sniffles like the rest of us. Claire, how was your week? What would you write into text?
Kathy Hochul, watch your ass.
Oh my God. Can I say, Hochul the Jokel has been ruining my life. I guess I've really been reaping what I sow. Everyone's out to get me.
Yeah, it's finally coming back to haunt us. I normally reserve commuting stories for the Patreon. So if you've ever wondered what you're missing out on the 2-hour weekly Patreon episodes, it is a lot of commute, which the people love. So I don't want to hear it. If you're not interested, stay away. Getting to the studio today, which normally takes me a mere 18 minutes, it took me 50 minutes.
Why?
Okay, I just sat on the A train. We just sat there for, I want to say, a full 20 minutes. And the problem is every time they made an announcement,
the doors are open when they make the announcements and there's so much noise.
Yes. So I couldn't hear a fucking thing that was going on. So I listened to 3 rounds of announcements before I finally went, because normally you just sit there and the minute you get off, they turn and leave and you go, well, I regret that. Like I would say for the most part, sunk cost, you just stay put on the train. It'll get you there eventually. And I feel like they make it known if it's not going to go. So I finally abandoned to go down to the C train, which is the local, not the express. And I had to wait 6 minutes. I know for a fact I waited more than 6 minutes. I finally get to Broadway Junction. I see the L. To get to the L from the A at Broadway Junction, you must go up steps and down steps after going up and down lots of steps. Like it is truly 10,000 steps just getting from point A to point B and elevation. I went to a really hard workout today and I said, I just can't run. I watched the L come and go. You know when the next L was? 7 minutes.
Ugh.
The L is normally 3 to 4 minutes max. So I finally get here. Literally, it took me 55 minutes.
Insane.
It was insane. And I'm so mad because I shouldn't be punished. I'm a good person. I take the train. That's incredible. And I left my phone at home.
Oh, God, you are living in hell.
I really am. Okay. So a quick, now that we've shot on everything and the only people left, I think, are people that like us because we have not made it an easy entrance. If you love us and are down under in Australia, please don't forget we are coming to Adelaide, Brisbane, Perth, Melbourne, and Sydney, September 15th through September 30th. Please come out. We have a few tickets left to Melbourne and Sydney. We have tickets left to all the other cities, but we can't wait to see you. We can't wait to meet you. We love you so much.
And we will be making Australia-specific merch that will be for sale in Australia only at the shows, and we are so excited about it. So we hope to see you there.
And now we begin. I do want to preface, so she has written this book, one would guess to spite us personally, with this podcast in mind to make our lives hell.
Can I say, if that is true, it's the most successful memoir ever written.
This is not one of my top worst memoirs. I know
it is definitely not one of my top worst, but I found it extremely difficult to get through. And I really agonized over the way in which I feel okay discussing such
she's
heavy
really put
topics.
She's backed us into the corner. And now I feel, within respect to the mentally ill community, we will talk freely about Anna Marie. And I hope that we do a good job like differentiating what about her personally we don't like and what about this book we don't like versus like, we're not just here to attack her. We're not mad. We don't want her dead.
No, I just think that this book is extremely self-serving. I think that I take a lot of issue with these books, like Portia de Rossi type books that try to like weaponize these very serious issues that are not taken seriously in women and that like plague a lot of people. And they use them to like further their own self-important agenda.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
I don't like that either. But that being said, what I was going to say was that this book is written present, past. Every other chapter is a chapter of her 10-day stay at a mental hospital and then a reflective chapter that actually does go quite chronologically through her life, focusing mostly on men and her mother. Because of that, I understand that on your end, it might be a little bit hard to follow. We're going to do our best. I think luckily she doesn't say much of anything. I mean, it turns out you don't do a whole lot when you're getting psychiatrically evaluated.
Oh, Claire, she made 2 bracelets.
Yeah, and she potted a plant. And she did bad yoga. And she ate a bunch of clementines.
And she reminisced about her vintage Gucci collection. But calls herself distinctly not materialistic. So unpack that one, doctor.
It's different when it's high fashion and you have good taste. When unfortunately you're so aesthetically driven, it's almost spiritual. You must spend tons of money on your appearance in a way that is not vain. It's artistic. And in the fact that you can't tell the difference.
I'm a dumb bitch.
Anyway, My point is we will do our best to keep it cohesive and take you through the book and do our normal shtick, but there's a bit of back and forth.
It's a bit of back and forth, and it starts forth. First, they take their suitcase away from me. This is so they can search my clothes for drugs and weapons. Who are they? They are hospital staff. So she's checking herself in to a hospital for intense suicidal ideation, self-harm, and disordered eating. I try not to cry saying it all out loud for the first time in such a matter-of-fact way. So this book is written in an extremely matter-of-fact way. Everything is written in like limited contractions even, where she'll say, I do not place my thing on the counter. I cannot. You know what I mean? It's all written very clinically.
Yes. On a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the greatest, how great is your desire to die? 11.
So one of the things that also falls really flat for me in this book, or that I find very annoying, is that she is now commenting on her experiences based on the quotes she's chosen to include. So she's relaying the conversation and then reflecting on it, which is, you know, what happens in your head. But the fact that this is what she chooses to include in a book, right? So the doctor asks, on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the greatest, how great is your desire to die? She says 11. And then she says, apparently my risk is high. Why include that? Like, this whole book is her like challenging you to argue that she's not correct. Like, she's really grasping for your approval as the reader.
Mm-hmm. She's doing her intake conversation, talking about the self-harm, the restrictive eating. I was experiencing very bad anxiety exacerbated by the pandemic. So at first I wasn't eating because I was so anxious. I didn't have an appetite. Then it turned into a competitive game with my scale.
She talks about her exact weight at the time of entry, which I also find very frustrating. I think a lot of it just undermines her overall claimed mission of this book, which is to help other people who are going through something similar. Because I think in creating all of this specific language around like numbers and definitives, she makes it this like competition, which is specifically unhealthy in this space, like especially within eating disorders.
Most of my life, my outward presentation has not matched my inward reality, but with my body gaunt, my face droopy and puffy at the same time, I'm forcing the outside world to confront a more honest and probably scary version of my mental state. Now today, I no longer have to convince anyone how bad I feel.
She talks about her self-harm scars and how the nurse like breaks from her stoic intake protocol and is very shocked at what she's done to herself. And it all feels, I feel this is so fucked up to say, but it like feels braggy to be like, I broke the facade of the nurse because I'm so good at this. I really don't think that's a healthy thing to put out in the world.
So she explains where she is. There's a bunch of different houses on this campus where you go, and she's here for like a week-long, super intensive psychic evaluation. The idea being that if you have been with an extensive therapist and they haven't been able to find a final diagnosis, you can come here and they will like run all the tests on you, and at least you'll have an answer. So she has chosen for some reason to be in Dalby, which is the house where you go for female only for patients struggling with addiction and co-diagnosis mental illness. She, of course, does not have a drug or alcohol addiction. I arranged ahead of time to be there because I absolutely refuse to be around men. It is the only single-gendered home. She's also upset that it turns out that 3 of her 4 primary physicians at this place will be men. And her therapist, Dr. Carr, is like, they're professionals. You really got to give them a chance.
I sit down on the bed, which is hard and sounds like plastic around the mattress. I've lost so much weight. I'm cold all the time. At home, I wear long underwear under my clothes during the day and keep sweats under a big down comforter at night.
So a lot of this is like the minutia of what it is to be in one of these places, which I guess is interesting. However, it does seem a bit repetitive. So I don't know that you need 15 chapters dedicated to the day-to-day ins and outs. It's a lot of like going to get dinner, going on a walk, going to Tai Chi. But she starts talking about her relationship with Dr. Carr, her longtime therapist of 5 years. When she first met her, she says, my brain never stops. I have an internal monologue that is running all the time. I constantly weigh and analyze everything I do and say. I worry something bad will happen to someone I love. I worry my dog Petunia will die. I worry about whether or not to have children. I think no, but then I think, what if I regret that? I worry about germs. Sometimes it's hard for me to get on the subway. When I'm near someone who's coughing, I panic. She also says she was raised in a very homeopathic household that did not trust Western medicine. So she herself has only ever used like actual Western medicine or gone to the hospital a few times in her life. So she is adamant about exhausting every resource to fight her anxiety before she turns to medication. So she talks about when she finally does start using Xanax. That's when she is joined the costume studies graduate program at New York University. She's about to have like a full mental breakdown. She's having panic attacks. She's like, I can't keep up. I'm going to fail out of this program. But she does not want to use Xanax to help with her anxiety. Anna, Dr. Carr said, I promise you'll get the hang of it and you'll learn to do all the things you're afraid you can't do. And she says, I think you should consider medication. I mean, she keeps pushing back and saying no. And finally, Dr. Carr's like, listen, right now we can work on the anxiety, but soon your anxiety will make you almost like delusional in your state of obsession with it. So she finally tries Xanax. The way antidepressants changed my life so fast was comical. Within 2 weeks, I had a sense of calm I had never experienced in my life. My body stopped vibrating. It was not as if my anxiety completely dissipated, but the cyclical thinking, the inclination to bore into a thought or decision until it subsumed all rationality stopped. I felt lighter, happier. My only regret was not doing it years earlier. So that's fine. I get that a lot of people struggle with it, and I'm happy she found the release that she was hoping she would get from it. That being said, the amount of times in this book, she's like, I can't go to the doctor. I can't go to the hospital. You don't understand. I don't do things like that. I'm just like, okay, I can't with this self-imposed nonsense.
Yeah.
These rules that you recognize were like made up by your parents and not necessarily true. Sure, it's hard to not live by your parents' rules anymore, but you're 35. You want to be seen as self-aware. If you want the credence of being self-aware enough to write this book, that's good. But then why 6 months ago did you not believe in Advil? I don't know. She also says that getting to this point, things have been really bad. COVID shut the world down. My marriage was falling apart. And the more I tried to hold on, the faster it seemed to slip away. I began cutting with more frequency than at any other point in my life. That is like one of the 4 comments about her marriage I think we get. There's very little talk of the marriage, even though it is understood and eventually concluded that she is not a mentally ill person. She was just a woman in crisis. It is weird to read a book about like the honest crisis you're in when you cannot talk about what brought you there.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people have speculated, was it legal matters? Like, was she not allowed to talk about him? Was she not allowed to mention him? Or does she choose not to? I could see it definitely being kind of a fuck you to the people who are reading this book because they want information on her relationship with John Mulaney, because she feels very resentful of the fact that a lot of her social media relevance comes from the dissolution of that marriage.
I get that. That'd be upsetting. The problem with her is that her biggest fear, the thing that she claims holds her back with anger, is men and how awful they are. And yet so much of her life is aligned with them. So she's trying in this book to unalign herself with men. But of course, as the title suggests, men have called her crazy. The majority of this book is about the men in her life.
Yeah, it is just kind of dishonest because I don't know. It's hard to read a book about how her life was falling apart in 2020 without any acknowledgement of the very public breakdown of her marriage that happened in 2020. This book is obviously very self-obsessed. It is also at certain points like downright bad. Like, it's written in this very self-important way. And the language, I'm just like, what are you even talking about? One of the lines that I highlighted because it really stopped me in my tracks was, okay, so she's introducing you to the people that she's living with in Dalby, the other girls. Caitlin is tall, but her face looks very young. It's one of those visual incongruencies whereby I am reminded how height is often inadvertently associated with age. What? This book should have been 15 pages.
She likes to mention a lot how everybody thinks she looks so young.
Every single time it's mentioned, she brings it up.
And here's something, is I found it like a little annoying that she keeps bringing up every time someone says, oh, you look so much younger, or oh, like you're so tiny. And then later she's hooking up with a guy and she talks about how ugly she feels and how old. And I'm kind of like, ugh, I don't know. And then I remembered that in her marriage, she was ultimately left for like a bombshell sex vixen. And I was like, oh, of course you probably feel like shit. There was a national inescapable narrative that your husband left you for like the hottest woman. That's going to make you feel bad. But it was hard to remember that context because she refused to acknowledge it.
Yes.
Okay, so she gets there, they eat dinner. She's in this house with about 4 other women. Normally it houses up to 16, but because it's like the middle of the Christmas break, basically she goes in on January 3rd or 4th. It's relatively empty. So she just like gets to meet everybody.
So she's getting to know everyone. She tells them that she's an artist. And then she goes, well, I mostly live off my husband's income, but I also make art and I'm a student.
Well, they specifically say, so you make all the money you need as an artist. Yeah. Actually, I'm very dependent on my husband's income.
So that's the next mention of JM.
I mean, it is very like diary-esque in that she's like, then we watched an episode of Goliath. Goliath sucks. Here's why. Here's the TV rules of the house. Okay.
So she's really anxious. She's very in her own head. I guess a lot of this book is about how much she thinks about herself, because obviously she's writing an entire book about herself, but she's writing a book about how she always is thinking about what other people think of her. She says that she's concerned because they're watching Goliath. I sit there quietly, eyes never leaving the screen. I'm becoming increasingly anxious that the other girls might not like me because I'm quiet. This has been a theme my whole life. Then this one girl becomes irritated. It's unclear by what or by who. She's exhaling deeply and audibly. She's fussing with her glasses repeatedly. I need to talk to a house manager or I'm going to explode, she says, getting up from the couch. I'm suddenly struck with panic that I've done something to make Kristen upset, but I can't imagine what that could be. Perhaps it's just my presence.
You are at a rehab.
You're watching TV with a group of girls at rehab
who are actively detoxing from hard drugs they're physically addicted to. Not everything is about you.
It's so insane to read because I'm just like, what do you mean? And she doesn't ever walk away from this thought process saying, could it have been about me? She just resolves to be more warm and outgoing moving forward.
It's just so funny to walk into a house full of people who are like actively detoxing from drugs, watch somebody have like a physical fit and be like, I need to get out of here. And then go, oh my God, it's me. No, it's the heroin that they want.
She's in rehab. You're all in rehab.
So then she says, I cut myself for the first time at age 14. She shows her friend Amanda and Amanda's like, please don't do that. I think that's bad for you. And she's like, totally.
She was never a cool girl. I did not want to be ordinary or fit in. I wanted to be exceptional, special. I leaned into how different I appeared, knowingly instigating my own ostracism. If I couldn't be accepted, fuck it, I wanted to be hated.
But it seems like she kind of always has friends. This girl, Amanda, who's 2 years older than her, like reaches out to her freshman year and says like, let's be friends and hang out. They become inseparable.
So then she gets into her core traumas.
Oh my God. You guys are never, brace yourselves. Trigger warning.
She was a ballet dancer from age 7 to about 12. In her teen years, I was forced to accept that I was not skilled enough to make it as a professional. It crushed me, stripped me of my identity. Who would I be if not a dancer? You're 12. You could be something else.
They later call this in therapy. They go, wow, that was your first loss, huh? And I'm like,
she goes, it actually wasn't my first loss, but we'll get to her first loss later.
She also is just like a very melancholic, sad young girl. And her mom will not really acknowledge it. Her mom sees her kind of mope about the house and goes, you must have allergies. And when she refers to herself as depressed, she goes, no, you're not. You just have allergies. And it turns out she does, in fact, have allergies to eggplant, but that's not really the underlying problem here.
She gets back into the day-to-day of rehab.
She has a small mention of watching people talk about gratitude and feeling gratitude when you're in your recovery, when you're working on handling your addiction. And she has a small moment of, I listen with festering anger, do better, I want to scream at them. The people you're so grateful for love you, and you're filling them with a pain so intense it feels like death. You're creating a tornado of destruction where everyone loses something. Yet I stay silent, of course, because you cannot scream at people you don't know. And because in reality, I do not know any other situations. So of course, that also I think is about John Mulaney, but that can only be referenced if you know the context, which I think is a very Caroline Calloway-esque type thing to do, to be like, well, everyone knows my life story. I think if you want to be a great writer, you must unfortunately assume that your book can hold itself out of context. And so you either can or cannot play this game of like being like, well, you guys know who my husband is, right?
All I feel is anger that I'm 35 and back to cutting myself and that my life feels like a series of bad mistakes. This I found very honest, that in a gratitude circle, she's just mad at herself. I wish she had like gotten into what those mistakes really were, because all she does throughout this book is kind of bring up other relationships that feel extremely irrelevant.
I mean, it really is incredible how little accountability she takes in this book.
Yeah.
She looks deep into herself and goes, I'm the victim. And that's kind of what she walks away with.
Yeah. She's talking about the day-to-day of rehab and she brings a notebook. My brain is percolating with activity and narrating every move I'm making. What if I fill the notebook and I can't get more paper? What if I'm having all these thoughts and I don't fill the notebook? Maybe it means the notebook has too many sheets to fill in just a week. What if it's actually not even a standard size notebook at all? And then she starts talking about how she actually might be a genius writer. Like, what if this narration is some serious mental illness poking through me? No, that doesn't make sense. What if I'm actually a genius? What if I'm a great writer, but I also hear voices? I wonder what that would be like. Is it possible for someone to discover that they're a genius at 35? It does feel like something that would have been identified in my childhood. This walk does not feel very fun anymore. She just has too much time to think about herself.
Yeah, which I guess is the problem at this place. Like, you don't have access to your cell phone. You only get email like 1 hour a day. I do think there's a lot of time to think.
Yeah, but like I meant in general for her to end up here.
Yeah.
The fact that her crazy thoughts are her being like, what if I write too much? What if I don't write enough? What if I'm the best writer in the world? What if I'm the worst writer in the world? Like, I don't know, man.
Nothing.
None of those things seem important.
Nothing then. So good news. Nothing. There is no news. She has one of her first interactions with a man. They eat meals with their male house counterpart. So there's a guy, Adam, there. And she's already fucking furious. He has the nerve to say, you look like you're going to a fashion show. I give him a nearly expressionless smile. This is the exact type of comment I hate. It's not a compliment, but it's not an insult. Okay, tough stuff. And then he goes, I also really like your jacket. And then she's like, okay, maybe it is a compliment. And then he goes, and pink hair, look at you. I hate him. I hate him so much. None of these are compliments. Why is he commenting on the way I look?
Adam is a drug addict in recovery.
The whole group then has a conversation about what they're going to wear on Monday and the way that people do kind of dress up here.
And she feels like shit because she only brought sweats. The confluence of the pandemic and my slipping mental health has robbed me of my personal style, where I once lived in almost exclusively carefully sourced vintage dresses and Gucci from the early days of Alessandra Michelle's maximalist reign. Now I only wear roomy jumpsuits, pants with elastic waists, and one pair of Levi's. What?
I'm not going to get out here and like defend men, but the way that she's like, can you believe he said he liked my jacket? Should I shoot him?
I guess that's one thing that really pissed me off about this book is I also relate to like where she ends up later in this book, where she's just in this dating hell and it makes you kind of hate every man on the planet. I also agree with that. But the way she says it is so out of touch with any actual conversations with any actual people that I find myself defending men, and I hate that.
Dude. And so like the next day she goes to yoga and Adam's there and she goes, I am furious. To deal with the anger, I focus my attention on doing every pose perfectly. I am so much better than him at yoga. This makes me happy.
She really frames men in the exact center of every moment of her life.
And then they both see this wild group of turkeys and they're both like, wow, they're really beautiful. And he gives her like a fist bump and he goes, it's cool we got to see them. And it's just like, okay, I guess he is just like a person who's also struggling right now. I'm not defending him, but I also think if you feel hatred at those three comments and somebody going, oh, cool, wild turkeys, that is a you problem.
Yeah.
That is something you have to work on. She goes to an AA class. She's very inspired.
She gets a rock and the inscription reads, self-worth can only be defined by you, not by others. I'm not so sure about that.
She is not sure about that.
She is not sure about that.
I agree with her there. She does not know how to make her own self-worth.
This episode is brought to you by One Protein Bars. Protein bars get a little bit of a bad rap for being dry and flavorless, and One Protein Bars take everything you know about protein bars and flip it on its head. They are so delicious. It's like all of your favorite sweet treats packed with protein. So they have one flavor that is a Reese's peanut butter cup, but full of protein so that it keeps you fuller longer. And it takes your afternoon snack to a new level, whether you're craving something sweet, but you want something that's going to keep you full all afternoon. One Protein Bars, it does it all. They also have a cookies and cream flavor, which is basically my favorite childhood candy bar turned into the perfect post-workout snack. To have my favorite candy after a workout and know that I am packing on muscle, boy, oh boy, what a dream.
I love them. We keep them at the studio. I'm not allowed to have peanut butter at home, so I get into the studio, and when I am feeling cranky and hungry, and I'm just craving a little bit of a pick-me-up, the idea that my little sweet treat pick-me-up is a peanut butter cup that's going to keep me full for the entire episode. It really staves off the hunger. It gives me the energy I need. I am excited to come to work. I used to dread it, but now I love it.
Each bar has 18 grams of protein, and they come in so many flavors. You can get birthday cake, you can get blueberry cobbler, and you can get them at a retailer near you or on Amazon.com.
So now we're back, freshman English class. A very popular senior put his arm around my shoulder and asked this, what's your name? He goes, all right, Anna, I'll see you tomorrow. The next day, he puts his arm back around her. You're pretty, but you dress crazy. And she goes, I thought I had a cool look. And he goes, you do, but you'd be prettier in like more normal clothes. Her like origin story is that her mother was a very talented seamstress. She made all of her own clothes all through high school and got accepted to FIT. However, her grandfather believed that like a woman's job was to be a wife. So instead, she had to go to a local teacher's college, learn how to be a teacher. And she had to give up on her fashion dreams and she became a stay-at-home mom. So Anna wears all of her mom's old vintage self-made clothing throughout high school, which does give her quite a unique look and like feeds into her thing that she's different than everybody.
Yeah, she says it's very Stevie Nicks vibes. So she and Ethan hang out again He comes over to her house. They sit down and he kisses her. The kiss was hard and messy and unpleasant. I wanted it to stop, but I also didn't. It was the validation I needed that I'd never gotten from guys at school.
So she says, Ethan pushed me onto my back and got on top of me, trapping my small frame beneath him. My head pinned onto the couch cushions by his tongue. He used his knees to open my legs and pushed himself against me until I felt his erect penis. They keep making out and then he goes.
It seems like a problem in her life up until she's like 36 is that she doesn't know what pleasure is and she doesn't seek it in relationships. And I get that in high school you wouldn't even really know about that. This is like the start of that.
I guess here's the hard thing about reading this book is to have literally titled it Men Have Called Her Crazy. So much of it is about like, here's why I fucking hate men. And it's actually turned me into like a crazy person, how much I hate them because they've treated me horribly. He later is like, why don't you come by Abercrombie? I work there. We can hang out after I get off. She has her dad drive her to the mall. She gets there and he's like, okay, well, I'm working right now, so I can't really hang out with you. She's getting stood up. It sucks. It ends right there. But this is like trauma 1. I guess trauma 2 if you count ballet. Trauma 2 is that then Ethan, who she made out with, doesn't want her at Abercrombie. And I am like, yeah, that sucks.
High school boys are insecure and fucking rude.
Maybe not even insecure. Maybe he thought he liked you and then he didn't.
Well, it seems like the other girls at Abercrombie are like, why is this weird girl here? So I think that he saw her in the context of his Abercrombie girls and was like, never mind. She's not sleeping well at the hospital. You get woken up for checks. It's just not a great experience.
So day 3, she has intake day, like a chill day. And then day 3, she begins this like long 5-hour test that will kind of do a full diagnostic run of her psyche. The first test is to draw a series of 9 images, how she sees them. And then when she's done and she has to get them as close as possible to the original images, they say, now draw them from memory. She almost has an anxiety attack. And then she has to do a Rorschach test.
She's also not sitting in a chair that she thinks is lovely. And she makes a point to say that in her house, each piece of furniture is an antique carefully chosen from a dealer or rehomed from my grandparents' house.
So she does the Rorschach test. And then there's some math problems. And she's sitting here telling you how she's doing at all of them. And this is when I was kind of like, this is crazy because later she sits and she works through all of the findings and all of these tests that her doctor tells her about. And I really was like, this is the equivalent of if I had somebody essentially like do a birth chart for me. And then I was like, this should be a book. People are going to be so interested. It's like just the most self-indulgent thing I've ever seen. Imagine me like, I'm going to do a 5-hour psychological exam on myself to find out what I am. And then also I'm going to tell everybody about the findings.
And then also I'm going to say, nope, not true.
Ultimately, she disagrees.
I'm very anxious about answering the questions accurately and honestly, which makes the test difficult to complete.
Then she does Tai Chi and art therapy. And she starts talking about how all of her other housemates get phone calls after dinner, but she doesn't because she didn't give anybody her phone number. And she kind of regrets that. She feels happy for how happy her housemates are when they get phone calls, but she starts to feel lonely. My sophomore year, I was in love with a boy named Julian. They met when she was the manager of the boys' cross-country running team. A very slutty job to have.
I like Julian because he seemed different from the other guys, a little weirder, a little more offbeat. He listened when I spoke and he laughed when I said something funny. Then she gets so upset because one night he brought me along to a game of Magic the Gathering. A few guys from the team played. I figured some of the other girls would be there, but when I arrived, it was just me. It felt like a test, not for me, but for the guys. How would they react to my presence? Would they have thoughts about Julian and I being together outside the boundaries of the greater group? Might they have unkind things to say about me, perhaps teasing Julian for bringing me along? The answers to these tests would be calculated and digested outside my presence, of course. Data to be analyzed only when the boys were alone. None of it ever explicitly communicated to me. I was furious that these boys would dictate my position in Julian's life. I'm sorry, what?
You just made that up. I don't know, maybe, but also maybe not. It's like weird that she looks back and never once wonders what her energy would have been like for somebody. So basically after cross-country season ends, they have a few months of like driving around, hanging out in parking lots, not really dating, but not dating. I think they only kiss once. And then slowly they drift apart until they no longer are really even on speaking terms in the hallways. And I am like, this is trauma 3?
So she says that these boys were all testing her and she felt furious at men for creating this obstacle for her to hurdle. And then she's like, anyway, the next couple months we spent hanging out, driving around. So you're saying you're furious about this test that you then passed?
I guess it's weird to have this whole book about how you're literally hospitalized for anxiety and then never once question your own judgment of situations where you are constantly perceiving yourself to be like judged awfully. Do you know what I mean? Like she never once has to say, I guess maybe he just like liked me and wanted me to come hang out with his friends.
Yeah.
And I hate having to defend men and I don't know the truth. Obviously, maybe it was a test. Maybe everyone thought she was such a freak that people literally, the way you do with a young dog to see if it's reactive or not around children, say, let's test this in small groups and see how they do. I don't know. Maybe he liked you and he invited you to hang out. That's what he was doing that night. I stopped chasing Julian, but I didn't stop chasing. Instead, I cemented my role in relationships as a pleaser, a convincer, a girl who, well into adulthood, would contort and conform to the desires of a man, overlooking his easy dismissal and dampening her self-worth, all to be loved. I'm sorry I didn't work out with that boy from cross country. I understand now why your life was unretrievably ruined.
If only you'd been one of the cross country runners and you could have run quick to retrieve it. So now she's back in the hospital. She feels tired and heavy with sadness. I miss my house. Its cocoon of aesthetic beauty, its woods, its solitude.
Then she starts talking about how she feels like her life is a series of starts and stops, walking road after road, hoping to find the one that leads to something meaningful. Yet when I come to an intersection, instead of walking straight, I unfailingly turn left. And then she gives a quick rundown of her adult life, which has been honestly a series of picking something up and then putting it down before she gets any real conclusion. I spent most of my childhood training to be a dancer, but I wasn't good enough to be a professional, so I changed focus. If you were a man, the way that we would rip you limb from limb, how many men have you met that were like, well, I was supposed to go pro in MLB, but I hurt my wrist 8th grade and I never got to go as far as even varsity.
I'm sorry, a career detour that happens before the age, first of all, athletically, that happens before the age of college is absolutely not worth mentioning. But in general, a career detour to be like, I had this plan for my life and by age 14, it seemed impossible. I don't know, man. You haven't even applied to college yet.
I thought I was going to be a dolphin trainer and the first woman president for a long time. I have rebounded. You must rebound.
I'll be honest. I thought I was going to be a radio show host and I'm doing pretty good.
Wow. You nailed it. I went to cosmetology school, but failed my state board exam and never got my license. I started art school, became very depressed and dropped out after 1 year. I cut hair illegally in people's apartments, but got bored and stopped. I became a makeup artist, but realized I hated being on sets and eventually ended that path too. My financial situation has always been precarious and I am embarrassed to admit made stable by the security of my romantic partners. Okay, I'm going to say something kind of fucked up. Is it possible that you don't have anxiety? You're just accurately understanding the situation you are in. Yeah, you feel like a loser. Well, I don't know. Get a job and make it work. It is kind of embarrassing to have by 30 started and quitted 10 different jobs and then only been able to make one thing work, and that's being the girlfriend to a rich man. I mean, it's no different than Crystal Hefner. The only difference is you need a validation that you're quite smart. At least Crystal Hefner wasn't walking around going, but am I a great writer?
It is just very hard to read her talk about her life, which I'm sorry, it's totally fine to start and stop things that you don't find fulfilling. But I don't know that it's just so directionless that of course you have anxiety, you're deeply unfulfilled.
I don't know. You don't need to go to a mental hospital for 2 weeks. You needed to try to take the cosmetology exam again. Just try a second time. See what happens. You needed to have someone not come bail you out financially so that you didn't have to push yourself through something hard. I don't know. Get a job. I think it would be huge for your self-worth to have a job.
I feel like so much of her life has been hoping that life would find her, the life that she was meant to live would land in her face. I don't think she thought that she would have to try hard ever.
Yeah, I'm sorry you're not this effortless genius. That's tough. I can relate. I too am not an effortless genius.
So she's talking to her therapist about her early life. She talks about when dance was fun and not yet heartbreaking. And her therapist goes, when did dance become heartbreaking? And she says at 13 years old, she was injured. And when she came back, she just could not keep up with the other talented dancers. It was very clear that she would never catch up. I'm sorry. If an injury at 13 years old is what knocks you out of the race forever, you were never going to win the race.
So then she says, well, my first heartbreak was actually when I was 11. My older brother had been a child actor and I wanted to follow in his footsteps. And I auditioned for this Broadway play and I actually got through 2 rounds of callbacks. And I was going to go to the 3rd callback, but my mom told me she didn't think she could handle a second child in this industry because they lived about an hour and a half outside of New York City. So it was a ton of schlepping for the mother. And her whole life had revolved around taking her kids in and out of rehearsals and auditions. And if she got a Broadway play, that would be every single day. Her mom would have to drive in and out of Manhattan. And so her mom does do this thing that I think is quite fucked up, to be honest, which is she says, tomorrow you'll go to school and to go to the audition for the callback, we have to leave at 2 p.m. So I will make the decision while you're at school, and the teacher will tell you that either I'm picking you up early or you'll take the bus home. If you take the bus home, that means you're staying the full day at school and you're not auditioning. But if the teacher says I'm coming early, that means we're going to go audition. So she waited the whole day. At 1 p.m., there was a phone call. She's taking the bus. That is
messed up.
Like a pretty mean way to do that. I do think like that's shitty. Again, this is like one of the traumas that has made you unstable. You do just at some point need to be a wee bit tougher.
I mean, so the therapist says you had 2 huge losses very early in life. I guess I did, I say. And this to me does actually feel very informative because I feel that because ballet and acting are 2 things that we kind of hold as exceptional, the fact that she ever thought she could be a professional dancer, the fact that she ever thought she would be a Broadway child star, she felt nearly special, but she kept getting knocked down. And so I think she thought at some point it'll be realized upon me. And it never was. And now she's sitting here in this hospital being like, well, can you at least call me the most needing to be in this hospital?
Well, I think it's also interesting that these are both like visible professions.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, her 2 major relationships are with the guy who sold College Humor. So again, like a famous comedian, and then John Mulaney, another famous comedian. She kind of took all of her dreams that did not work out. And also they did not work out. Just because you're not famous by the age of 13 doesn't mean you can't go on to have success. You could just get out there and work hard at it.
She could have become an actor at age 20.
I mean, the way that she's like, well, if I wasn't going to be a pro, I guess I should stop dancing. You could just dance for the fun of it. A lot of people in college dance for the fun of it.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I do think it's interesting the way that she has taken everything she wanted for herself and found men that had that success and then resented them deeply for it. And I am like, I get that. I understand that pattern. I know so many women who date comedians and then become comedians. And I do think that is probably because a lot of us were told, oh, like men are comedians. We don't see ourselves as funny enough to pursue comedy. That's like quite common. I say that I think like at the very beginning stage, women are funnier than men in stand-up because for a man to be doing stand-up, he just has to think he's funny. For a woman to get into stand-up, she has to have been told she was funny by like 100 people. I don't know, but then you just have to get over it.
Yeah.
The way that she like refers to the patriarchy as if it is like quite literally handcuffs around our wrists. Like every woman in the world is bound and gagged and duct taped to a chair. If it were that bad, there wouldn't be one single woman who has succeeded.
Yeah. We wouldn't have Hillary Clinton.
Thank God for her. More importantly, we wouldn't have Ellie the elephant.
Thank God for her. She is just the sexiest elephant I've ever seen in my life. I saw her strutting on Instagram the other day. Incredible stuff. Support for our show comes from One Protein Bars. Keeping a snack on you at all times is, dare I say, one of the most important things you can learn in this life. Okay, when I travel, my dad is really big on making sure you pack enough protein bars so that if you crash in the woods, you can survive there. But he's right. Can I say the amount of times that you and I have been on tour and our flights get delayed, everything gets mixed up. And what do we have? Nothing except for the protein bar in our bag. And I'm so grateful for it.
I never know when I'm going to get cranky. I'm a real, if I'm hungry, I'm mad kind of person. To have like a delicious protein bar on hand at all times. I love to throw them in my bag. I love to like forget I throw them in my bag and then surprise myself later and be like, thanks for taking care of me, Claire. The idea that I'm grabbing what I think is a candy bar and eating something delicious, but also fueling my body with protein is an amazing feat of science.
Imagine if we had had a protein bar in our pockets every single time you and I had gotten into a bit of an argument and it turns out one of us was just hungry.
That would have protected like 95% of our arguments, but the other 5% I do think are PMS.
One Protein Bars are the perfect protein bars to get you through a busy day. They are so good for a midday snack, for a post-workout bite. They come in so many amazing flavors like peanut butter lovers, like cookies and cream. They have 18 grams of protein per bar, and they taste delicious in every single bite. You can get One Protein Bars at your local retailers or at Amazon.com. So now she's in another relationship. She's in her junior year of high school and she's dating a 23-year-old, which in the beginning of this book, she talks about being in 2 relationships when she was underage with men who were overage. And she kind of talks about the way she wanted to be there, but now she, upon reflection, realizes it was messed up.
Mm-hmm.
And it was messed up.
I would say it's one relationship and then one date.
Yes.
So one guy takes her to see Lord of the Rings.
She hates it.
And like he fingers her after, and then they never talk again. However, this is happening around the time of her parents' divorce. Her parents get divorced. It's incredibly messy. I was relieved at first, but the separation proved at times more volatile than their marriage. This was due to their wildly differing opinions on why things ended in the first place. From my mom's vantage point, my dad had had an affair. My dad would tell you no affair took place, that his new relationship began only after he and my mom had decided to separate. Her mom then also used Anna definitely as a pawn and would say things like, how dare you go hang out with him? He left this family. He wanted out of the marriage. He doesn't get to see you anymore. And if Anna wanted to see her father, her mom would scream at her. He ruined my life. Sometimes I just wish I were dead. I feared her rage, but the depression was even scarier. When I did go out, I was terrified I might return home to find that she had taken her own life.
That's very scary.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I forgot the other trauma she shares on the next page. Once when she was 8, she saw a car crash.
Oh yeah.
You guys couldn't relate.
And then her date saw a car crash and she's like, why was it not affecting him? Anyway, so then she's back at the hospital. She sits down with Dr. Samuels and he says, tell me about the last year of your life. And she says, how much time do you have? He says, an hour. Smiling in mutual recognition that a year of one's life cannot possibly be truncated into 60 minutes. Really?
Are you familiar with the term strain trauma, Dr. Samuels said? Shock trauma is the type of trauma most people are familiar with. It's the sort of trauma that occurs when someone is in war combat. Strain trauma, on the other hand, happens over long periods of time when a person is in an environment that consistently puts them in a state of anxious arousal. He says, so basically, your mother was emotionally volatile. She had rage issues, and it seems she had trouble attuning to your needs because they were so different from her own. You didn't know what might set her off or what might get you in trouble. You couldn't trust that emotionally you wouldn't get what you needed when you needed it. Additionally, it doesn't seem like your dad did much to protect you from her anger. So then she goes into, but she was such a good mom. And he's like, I'm sure those things are also true. Both can be true. She can be both a good mother in some ways and a mother who created a volatile environment in other ways.
This girl has to read bell hooks.
And then she talks about the last time her mom ever screamed at her, which was at a Thanksgiving where she very calmly was like, if you scream at me, we won't have this conversation. And she hangs up. And then she goes, she never screamed at me again. But at that point, the damage had been done. She says that later in her life, her mom ends up going to this intense 6-week Rumamani Iyengar Memorial Yoga Institute workshop and came out a different person. And she wants to tell the doctor, no, this is her now. Look how great she is now. But I will say for the rest of the book, the way she talks about her mom in the present tense, it sounds like she still doesn't like her. Yeah. So it's funny to be like, you don't understand, she's such a good person now. Still can't stand the bitch, but
a really good
she's
person.
She's quiet.
In other ways. So then she's getting the results from some of her tests that she did. And she's told that she demonstrates some anomalies.
So basically, she's very smart and great at storytelling and pattern finding. But when she gets nervous about math, she shuts down completely. And he's like, it's not because you're not good at math. It's probably just because you're so scared you stop yourself from being able to function. And this is when it is God, I can't believe we're sitting here discussing your test results with you. I mean, it's just how many layers of talking about yourself, right? You're writing the memoir about taking the personality test and then discussing the results.
And the doctor's interpretation of the results versus your interpretation of the results.
They wonder if she had trauma in her early childhood because she's obsessed with blood and gore. So when she's in high school, she meets this guy named David, who's very sweet, who's part of a
punk band. David introduces her to this guy, Sam, who is 29 years old and she is 17.
Just disgusting. They exchange numbers. They end up kind of dating and talking all the time. She goes out to LA and visits him. She tells her parents she's visiting her brother in San Francisco, but visits him. And then even though she's accepted into a 5-year program at the new school, she defers for a year to go live with him in LA. This is where she goes to the Vidal Sassoon salon and studies cosmetology, which is really just more than anything a front for why she would go to LA.
She just wants a reason to be in LA to live with Sam. David is I think it's really fucking weird that you're talking to Sam, that you're visiting Sam.
She ends up having sex with Sam when she's 17 on that first visit. And then the next day reveals that she had been a virgin. And he's like, why didn't he even ask?
I guess I feel this part, I would really like to examine why her parents had no idea where she lived.
No idea where she lived. No idea. When she was 17 years old, they didn't call her brother to make sure she landed safe. That's crazy.
Yeah. She spent a year living in LA with a 30-year-old man and her parents just didn't know.
There's this sense of financial strain in her parents, and she gets to it later in flashbacks. But one of the big fighting points between her mother and father had always been how much money they have. Her mom wanted to do more expensive things than her father claimed he could afford. Anna kind of doubts that he couldn't really afford it. But he was also a middle school psychologist who like worked in the school. I am like, well, how much money did you think he had, Anna? She's like, yeah, we went on this month-long road trip and my mom was mad we didn't stay in nicer hotels. But my dad claimed we couldn't afford it. I'm like, do you think teachers can afford a month-long luxury vacation?
She also talks about this relationship with Sam and how she felt powerful. Pop culture had taught me that being a Lolita meant being in control. It meant being bad in a cool way. And this I understand. Like, I think it is very, unfortunately, like ingrained in our society to make 17-year-old girls think that they're manipulating adult men with their feminine wiles.
Yeah, and that means you have like a stake in the game, that you're doing it too. And of course, like this is so fucked up and awful. That man should go to prison and her parents should be like lose custody. I mean, that man is disgusting and her parents were bad parents.
Yes.
How did that never come up? Okay, fine. You didn't call when she landed and make sure that she got there
safe. Did you ever try to visit her?
But I mean, even that trip where she said she was visiting her brother and visited this guy instead, did they never later go, oh, how was it seeing your sister?
She kind of implies he was in on it. She says he's cool. I think he knew, and so he was just lying to the parents too. Her brother also never comes up in this book besides that.
Back at therapy, she's making therapy bracelets, and she wants you to know that she never even wears bracelets because her wrists are so small that they barely work.
A therapy dog comes to visit and everyone's obsessed with this dog, Biscuit. But she's like, I have a dog named Petunia and Petunia is way better than Biscuit. And everyone's like, oh, cool. I wish I had Petunia.
They're trying to get to the bottom of what they think is like a physical abuse she experienced in childhood. And the best thing they can come up with is on her 8th birthday, she got spanked. Which spanking is wrong. Obviously, I intend not to spank my child. We'll see how annoying it comes out. But like, I get it. Spanking is wrong. But it is so funny to be like, we think that you must have like experienced severe abuse. And it's like, once I got spanked on my 8th birthday.
She talks about 9/11 and how she witnessed January 6th from the hospital. And it like felt very 9/11 adjacent to her.
She did have one of the funnier responses I've ever heard.
Someone came into her class on September 11th and said someone flew a plane into the Twin Towers.
And she goes, what an idiot. Did he die? And they were like, yeah, a lot of people died.
So now she's back to her relationship with Sam. Things were becoming difficult. She felt very manipulated by him. She felt like their relationship wasn't feeling equal. He was very in control of her. And he didn't like that she was so immature. And it's like, well, Sam, maybe don't date a child, you fucking idiot.
It also seems like the one thing that made it survivable or like allowed to go on as long as it did is that he was out of town on tour most of the time anyway. So she would live alone at his apartment and then he would come home. And she's like, when he was gone, I was living on my own and very happy. But then he'd come back and I felt like I had to defer to him in all things. And like his schedule came first. It's crazy. He just had this 18-year-old girl at home. He's in his 30s.
Ugh,
it's insane.
He's literally like your age.
What is it about musicians and being pedophiles? They're addicted to underage girls.
It's disgusting.
I feel like more than any other group of people.
She starts to find evidence that he might potentially be cheating. And she's like, wait a second, is my boyfriend who's on tour for most of the year potentially cheating on me? But she doesn't know how to leave because she's lied about her living situation to her parents. And so she doesn't have a way out.
I feel sad for her because it seems like she wants to get out. But as you said, she doesn't know where to go. And she also claims the financial thing with her dad. She's like, I don't know. I feel like it'd be too expensive for me to come home. I am sad for her that her parents did not make her feel like she had a safe home base to return to, or that her safety and happiness was the number one priority. And I do think that is the failing of her parents.
Mm-hmm. And then she ends up finishing out the year. She fails her cosmetology exams.
And here's where I think she's like, but you don't understand. I was in a bad relationship. And I'm like, isn't everyone in cosmetology school in a bad relationship? Isn't that kind of like the requirement to get in? You think every hairdresser on earth has a perfect boyfriend at home? Are you out of your fucking mind?
Some of the people in cosmetology school were also paying rent.
That's what frustrated me about this book is if you want to make this a book about the small everyday ways that like you can be driven crazy by society, I get that. I think a lot of these things that you have experienced, most people have experienced, #me too.
But you've also then opted out of society by like marrying rich.
And living alone in Connecticut. But more than that, like writing this book about your personal exceptionalism. Do you know what I mean? It's not we're all in it together and it's not here's an insane story. It's here's an insane story where nothing crazy happens. Well, of course she failed cosmetology school. Look at what she was going through.
People go through things.
And specifically at cosmetology school. Haven't you seen Grease?
Oh, beauty school dropout. So it's checkout day almost, and the doctors are very concerned that her mental health is still in a very precarious state, and they think that she should be in an inpatient program for much longer, not just the evaluation program.
And this was where I was like, oh, this is the Yolanda Hadid of mental illness. Because I do think, unfortunately, in this country, you are allowed to be as sick as you can afford to be. And I think that that is like on both sides of the spectrum. Unfortunately, if you can't pay to go get an MRI, they will not tell you that you have cancer because your insurance didn't write off on it. And that is like the fucked part about insurance. But I also think in this for-profit healthcare system we have, of course, they're going to be like, after extensive research, we've decided what you need is another $30,000 stay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure 30 days with specialized care would be helpful for all of us. Who among us would not like to take a little DBT with us?
So she's going to all these meetings still. She's discovering that it's hard for her to let people in, and she's angry with men in general.
So she has this final wrap-up meeting, and she's beginning the outtake procedure. And all of her doctors who have worked with her are on Zoom. And also her therapist, Dr. Carr, is there. And she walks in and right away, Dr. Carr has a weird vibe and she kind of can't pick up on what's going on. So she's trying to be like, hey, Dr. Carr, love to see you. So good to see you. And Dr. Carr is just not responding and she cannot figure out what the problem is. There's a woman that's with her, Mary, who's so kind and warm and always has something positive to say and seems really sincere. And Anna is like, I want to be more like her. I want to be more like her. And then a couple days later, when new people arrive, she's like, well, it's too late at this point. Why would I be warm to them? This situation I'm in where it's upon me to welcome the new people. It's like, she's like, I'm only going to be here for 2 more days. So why would I go out of my way to be nice to them? It's always a different situation and it's harder for you. You can't be nice the way she was nice because it's just completely different.
Yeah, you guys are in way different situations that have randomly put you in the exact same mental health institution.
So before dinner, Dr. Phillips comes back to discuss all of my last testing results. His consistent openness to explain my results in depth, coupled with his warm demeanor, is something I have come to appreciate over this past week. She's crying because she's like, I've never felt so seen. She's like, I thought I was unknowable, but it turns out all it takes is 10 days and thousands of dollars in psychiatric testing, and I'm quite obvious.
I have a lot of hope for you, Anna. He says, you're open-minded, you're conscientious, and you care deeply for people, for your dog, and you're highly self-disciplined.
So when people leave this house, Dalby House, they do a rock ceremony where you pick up a rock. Everybody says something nice about you, and she decides she can't do it. She goes, I would, but instead I tell her that I've been too introverted and I'm afraid I would be forcing people to say kind things about me that they may not feel. She tells me that she thinks everybody would enjoy giving me encouragement, but I decide I cannot take that risk, even though I want to. Watching people search for compliments and inspiring words would be more hurtful than hearing nothing at all.
So now we're flashing back again. She is now dating David, the guy who introduced her to Sam. She's going to the new school in New York City. He's living in New York. He finds out that she is cutting herself, and he threatens her and says, if you do this ever again, I'm telling your parents and we have to get you help. Like, you have to stop.
She also says, besides her one friend, Amanda, I rarely told female friends I could speak about my emotions more freely with women, and so this information seemed less relevant to their understanding of me. But with men, I felt that they needed to know in order to take my emotions seriously. I relied on this attention from men as validation of their feelings for me because I didn't trust that I could get attention any other way. You're almost there, but okay, let's think again. Why would you only tell men that you cut but not tell women? Do you really think it's because women are just so open? And I'm not saying the patriarchy isn't real. I'm not saying it doesn't hurt women, but I do think you are more obsessed with male validation than the average person, and you have indulged that, and that is why you hate them so much, because they have all the power over you, and you have never once thought to take it back. And that's what's frustrating, is she doesn't seem to understand that at some point she could go out there, be single, get a job, and live a life that she is proud of, and start taking baby steps there. Instead, she would rather just keep dating more and more men to see if there's a new one that can fill the hole.
Yeah. Her and David break up, and she immediately starts dating a heroin addict. She lives on 3rd Ave with 3 roommates in a 1-bedroom apartment. She's working as a shampoo girl because she doesn't have her cosmetology license, so all she can do is shampoo.
Her dad also gets remarried at this point, and he claims that he told her that he had proposed, but she doesn't even remember that conversation. She's like, I don't think he told me that. She obviously shows up to the wedding very upset. For somebody who hates men, this whole book is mostly about how awful her mom is, and kind of goes easy on her dad. Her dad's barely a presence. I mean, truly, her brother does not exist in this book. Her dad comes up once or twice, but mostly it's about the terrifying anger of her mother.
Yeah.
And I am like, okay, for someone who hates men, you have no problem talking about how much you cannot fucking stand your mom, and your dad really gets off easy. The worst thing he does is get remarried, but even that is treated kind of how I think anybody would treat their dad's marriage.
Yeah.
Which is different than how Marie Tendler treats everything.
And it's just like everything in this book is so contingent on who she's dating at the time. Like her self-harm. So after her and David break up, she starts self-harming again. And everything is based on a schedule of like where it falls within her relationship status and like what she can do based on each relationship. So she's getting ready to check out of the hospital and she has a call with Dr. Carr and her therapist and her caseworker in the hospital.
She's really no different than Kristen Doute.
I know.
Except for she has more money and like has listened to Fiona Apple.
Yeah.
This is literally if Kristen Doute thought she was an artist, but like never finished a painting and couldn't figure out who to blame.
So then Dr. Carr gets on Zoom and says, we need to discuss how we want to move forward working together. Perhaps we need to get a divorce. I'm stunned and silent, shocked by the nonchalance with which she compares our professional relationship to a crumbling marriage. She's also in a crumbling marriage.
Yeah, so that's a pretty vicious thing for Dr. Carr to say. They're in this final outtake Zoom where all of her doctors are there.
I feel like it's coming before it happens. Implosion. Now I have the word to identify it. My body is hot, but also shivering. Dr. Phillips steps in. Anna, can you describe what's happening for you in this moment and what has brought up this outpouring of emotion? I feel like I'm getting in trouble. Then I start sobbing again. I'm afraid Dr. Carr is deciding she doesn't want to be my therapist anymore. I don't understand why this is happening. Dr. Carr interrupts me. Anna, your fear that I will leave is based on nothing. Based on nothing, it's what you just said. Dr. Carr then says, historically, who leaves more often? And she like feels that Dr. Carr is attacking her from every angle and everyone else is just sitting there watching it. And when they hang up, everyone else is like, okay, Dr. Carr was being a huge bitch right now.
But this is literally her outtake interview. So she has this conversation and then immediately takes all her stuff, gets in her car and drives off the hospital lot. She immediately starts crying so badly that she has to pull over and she doesn't know what to do. So she calls one of the psychiatrists and she's like, it's Anna. Can we just chat for what just happened? And basically she's like, I don't understand what happened with Dr. Carr. And he goes, I want to tell you that it is clear to me that you possess a very strong intuition. That intuition should be listened to. If you are feeling unsure about your dynamic with Dr. Carr, I would urge you to pay attention to that. So she comes right back to the hospital and they're like, do you want to check back in for 3 more days and talk about what just happened? And she's like, yes, please.
And then she starts flashing back to some of the times that Dr. Carr has acted like kind of a lunatic. So she checks into the hospital January 2021. Right before COVID had hit, she was doing her master's program in Washington, D.C. and zooming into Dr. Carr's office in New York. And she says that at one point, Dr. Carr was like, you need to come in for a 2-hour in-person
Well, it was because
session.
She was like starving and cutting herself. And so Dr. Carr is like, you're really fucked up. You need to come back up here. And she insists that she take the train up and do a 2-hour session.
Yeah, so she gets there. She spends 3 hours on the Amtrak, gets to Dr. Carr's office at noon. And at 12:50, Dr. Carr is like, well, that's our time. And she's like, you made me come up here for a 2-hour session and it's been 50 minutes. And Dr. Carr is like, oh, well, I can't. So see you later. And she's like, what the hell was that? And now she's thinking back on these moments and saying like, is my relationship with Dr. Carr deeply fucked up?
And everybody's telling her, yes, we would say so. And she's like, well, now at least I know I'm not crazy. She's been making me feel crazy. And I feel very relieved to hear that other people validate my experience.
And this is something that, again, we don't know the situation. We don't know the actual conversation that happened. We only have Anna's transcription of the conversation along with her context. And this is something that I did feel really sad about because I do think that
bad therapists, if you get in their clutches, you're so fucked. You're so vulnerable.
I think it can be a very predatory situation because I think good therapy is so important for so many people. And I think bad therapy can be so, so damaging to so many people. And I think that if she ended up in the clutches of a predatory therapist who was exploiting whatever trauma she did have and exacerbating it, then that is something that is really, really hard.
So she calls her mom and says, can you keep watching my dog? I have to stay for 3 more days. And her mom is like, fine.
And this makes her mom seem like such an asshole, but also maybe her mom is like, what are you doing?
And her mom's like, but I made you food already. Her dog is like stressful. Petunia is a tough dog. She has every kind of medical allergy in the world, every kind of medical problem. And on top of that,
is like untrained,
bitey, barky. Back in her childhood, she's in her early 20s now. I think she's 21 years old. Her and David are hanging out as friends. They broke up amicably. They stay in touch. They go to a Death Cab for Cutie concert and he sees that she's been cutting again. And true to his word, he insists she go tell her parents.
So he's kind of the only good person that she's really dated. He really cares about her. He really watches out for her.
She goes and they're like, well, what do you want to do? And she's like, I think I need therapy. And her dad's just like, well, that's going to be expensive.
And she's like, well, I need you to help me pay for it. And they go, are you sure? Yeesh capiche. We don't know if we have the money for it. And her mom's like, we'll figure it out.
Her and David get back together briefly. It's still not as it should be, so they break up again. With love and respect for the time we spent so closely entwined, we parted ways, this time for good.
She gets her period and she's like, my cycle synced up with the girls at the hospital. No, it didn't. You've been there for 10 days. That's just not how that works.
So she gets her period and then she goes to yoga or something. And she suddenly has a horrible, vicious pain. And she knows that it's probably a cyst that's about to burst on her ovary, that she gets them. And she remembers the first time it ever happened. It was in LA in 2016. She like passes out essentially from the pain. And she finally calls an ambulance after doing this whole thing about how women die more often because they undermine their own pain. And she's like, I won't be that kind of woman. And I'm like, okay, good.
She crawls down the stairs to wait and unlock the door when the firemen arrive. And my question is, so she mentions that she was living in LA for her husband's job, that she woke up in extreme pain at 6 a.m. Where is your husband?
He might have already been on set.
Yeah, I guess he probably was. Another question I have is, was he a phone call?
More importantly, the firemen who show up are super hot. And then they're so nice to her. They say she has a great eye for design. They love her interior design.
And then she's like, please, I just woke up and I haven't walked my dog yet. And if I go to the hospital and I'm stuck there, what if my dog doesn't go out? So the fireman walks Petunia and then loads her into the ambulance.
Dude, and then she has this conversation where, again, like, I don't mean to like question all of her experiences. They say, where's the pain? She says, my ovaries. They go, could you be pregnant? She goes, no, Jesus Christ. Don't these people talk to each other? No, they don't. I'm sorry. This is something she's mad at time and time again. This is just the way it is. You have to relay the same information. I'm sorry, our medical system sucks, but it's not like a personal ad at you. She goes, no, I couldn't be pregnant. I have my period. And he goes, oh, it's just your period? And she goes, I don't know if it's just my period. I have a question. I wonder if they were trying to ask, like, is it a miscarriage? That's how I read that. If somebody was like, oh, it's just your period.
I guess I need to hear it because there are so many things. And I think the medical industry is obviously so dismissive of women. Obviously, there's like a massive conversation right now where they spent years being like, you don't even have nerve endings in your cervix, so we can just stab it willy-nilly and you won't feel a thing. Meanwhile, women are like passing out from the pain and they're like, women are so dramatic, LOL. And then finally, women were like, do you know what? I think we actually have a way higher pain tolerance than men even. So you might be assholes. Like, there is obviously so much trauma for women in the medical space where our pain was not taken seriously up until, I guess, probably like 10, 15, 20 years from now. Hopefully by then. But that being said, I don't know, man. Right now, you need to just like answer the questions.
Okay, so now she like is back in time, right? She's at the hospital, the mental facility, worried that she's about to have another cyst rupture. She's bent over in pain. The house manager comes up and says, do you know why you might be experiencing such intense pain? Well, I get cysts sometimes, they rupture. The woman goes, that's a serious medical condition that requires hospitalization. Do you need to go to the hospital? No, never mind. I just need Advil. I can't talk. Eventually, the pain subsides enough for me to walk upstairs to my room and also enough for me to register my extreme embarrassment. I'm ashamed that my ovaries can bring me to my knees in pain, and I'm ashamed that I'm ashamed of that. Why are women so fucking ashamed of ourselves? I blame men. You have to take accountability. Just don't be ashamed. You have a medical situation that is painful. You have to just choose to say, this is something that people get hospitalized over. It's fine. I forgive myself. I understand that like we were raised in this shame system, but like, I don't know. I remember in 7th grade, like this older cool girl, Zoe, being like, oh yeah, I have my period. And like walking around the tampon and being like, whoa, I guess you don't have to be ashamed. And that was kind of like a wake up call for 12-year-old me. Yeah. So I do think at 35, as like this staunch man-hating feminist, maybe you just choose to say, I allow myself to feel pain. And that's what's stressful to me about this book. The way that she's like, well, they said it's embarrassing and I have no other choice in the matter. No, at some point you can choose not to abide by their code of conduct.
I agree.
Oh, your grandpa doesn't want to hear about your women problems? Well, guess what? He's probably dead and you're an adult. So you do what you want. It's not embarrassing to go to the hospital. Look at this book. Isn't that the whole premise of this book? That it's okay to ask for help?
Then she talks about being in a session with a guy named Henry who's rich and she hates him.
But then he tells a story about losing a sports career due to an injury in college. I feel sad when he recounts this because I know intimately from dance what this type of loss feels like. And she goes up to him and she's like, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, okay, shut up.
So now she is living in New York in Queens. Amanda has moved to Queens, her childhood best friend, and they have an apartment together.
She says Amanda got a job at a tech company that made comedy videos for the internet. The word tech, I get that a camera is tech and I get a web is tech, but would we call College Humor a tech company? Any company with a website is tech, I guess. We're tech.
We're a tech company. So then she goes to a party with Amanda and the CEO falls in love with Anna.
How lucky.
How lucky. He thinks she's so cute.
He has just sold the company for millions and millions of dollars, so he's so rich and has an apartment in Chelsea.
He says, I like you because you don't care about fancy things. You're down to earth, but you know how to rise to the occasion. I think she rose too far with that collection of vintage Gucci and hand-picked vintage furniture.
In her second home. She says, having money, power, means you get to make a lot of the decisions that people with less money, less power, simply have to go along with, even if they don't want to. I didn't pay for it, so who am I to complain? This inequality might begin as innocent, but eventually it coalesces into an insidious dynamic where the person with less remains submissive and pliable to the will of the one with more.
I don't believe Theo was malicious or mean or that he wanted me to feel subordinate to his power. I just think he didn't consider it. And this is something that I understand how this can become a dynamic, but if you did consider it, then you need to be the one to speak on it or change it. If this is a dynamic you don't enjoy, then I don't know, you don't have to date a rich and considerate man. And I get the power and the pull, but the way she just hates everything, I guess it's hard because I'm like, I understand you didn't like this, but what did you like? She makes fun of the parties he throws and how everyone's listening to All My Friends by LCD Sound System.
She says Theo was not particularly funny.
And it's just like, why'd you have to shoot at LCD Sound System?
Theo was nice and he was generous, never making me feel bad for the things that we did that he paid for.
He hates that she's a hair cutter, a hair shampooer.
He doesn't say that. His friend Rachel says that.
Yeah, but then when she asks him, do you hate this about me? He's like, well, I just don't know why you need to work at a salon. It doesn't sound that cool. Why don't you just start your own haircutting business?
And it is like, well, she's not licensed. So he goes, well, just come cut my hair at the office and then everybody will want you to do that. And then you can own your own business and have your own hours. And sure enough, it works.
So now she doesn't have a job. She just kind of like works for his friends.
She like really takes a shot at him being like, can you believe he doesn't even take home leftovers? I'm like, I guess I can believe it.
Every summer, he gets a house in the Hamptons with his friends and brings her along. She doesn't pay for it, but she feels like weird. She like can't hold down a regular job because she has to go to the Hamptons with him every summer. And when she's like, I don't know if I can go, I have to work. He's like, well, then just quit your job and come to the Hamptons. And she does, which I am like, well, at what point do you have a responsibility to yourself? No matter how unhappy I was, I would not back down or bow out. Instead, I kept coming back for more. Being with Theo and surviving the Hamptons became a petty masochistic game, one I was determined to win. What do you win?
A weekend in the Hamptons.
Congratulations.
The world's worst prize. This is like so frustrating. She has no self-awareness. I'm not saying this was a good relationship, but it's interesting that she never takes any accountability for the fact that she like
was obviously using him.
She is. She's dating this man that she doesn't like. And just because she plays stupid games, wins stupid prizes, just because she doesn't like the prizes, this is what society told you is good. And you clearly feel good being the girlfriend of this highly prized rich man.
But you don't like him. You don't like his friends. She has like a real contentious relationship with some of his friends.
All she can talk about is how inconsiderate he is for like not realizing the dynamic between them, that he had so much more money. And I'm like, well, how about how inconsiderate you are for knowing that you don't like him and you hate the lifestyle and dating him anyway? Not that I'm like saying he's not a bad guy. I mean, I can't imagine a 26-year-old with tons of money because he's so funny with his friends.
I'm sure he was a fucking piece of work.
He's a 26-year-old that just like randomly made millions of dollars. Do you ever look back and go, what did we know? We were just kids. It's so unforgiving and also like unaccountable. Like nobody made you date that man.
I don't know. If you don't want to change your entire lifestyle for him, why should he change his entire lifestyle for you? Maybe you guys are just deeply incompatible.
I mean, it's just that thing of being like, he spent all this money on me and like took me all these fancy parties and to these fancy vacations and I didn't even like it or him. Okay, then what did you like? Because you stuck it out. Lord knows you weren't in a bad relationship with the poor.
I mean, she says that they went on a trip to Japan. She's like, he had so much money, but we didn't even really take a fancy trip.
On the way back, she sees a pretty mean email from his friend Rachel saying she's a gold digger. When you and I were hanging out, I insisted on paying for everything myself, even though I didn't have the money. She's taking advantage of you. You're blind to who she actually is. She will leave you broken alone. So they get into a huge fight. And I am just like, no, obviously that's horrible and you should have broken up with him. And she keeps being like, even if you don't feel that way, why would you not stand up for me to a friend who feels that way about me? And I agree, but I am like, I feel like I was in a similar relationship in my early 20s and I would sit there and be like, I don't want to be in the Hamptons. I don't want to be at these fancy dinners, blah, blah, blah. But then like, why didn't I leave? At some point you have to take accountability and be like, well, there was something that was quite validating about it. Even if it's not what you personally want, society told you like the best thing you can do is date a rich guy. And like you're at these places other people want to be. And there is that thing when you're young and you don't know yourself, you go, well, this isn't what I want, but it's what someone wants. And it makes me feel good to have what someone else wants but can't have. And you love that. And she loved that. And for her to like not take accountability and be like, well, the Hamptons sucked, but it beat my like 4-person studio apartment in Queens. If she didn't want to be there, she wouldn't have been there. She's not being honest.
And I get at 23 not being able to be honest about that situation, but looking back, writing it down now, you have to see this.
She screams that he's a fucking liar. And then she goes, here's the thing about men lying to women while telling them they are crazy or overreacting. The lying, the underplaying on their side makes us doubt our intuition and intelligence. So eventually when suspicions are confirmed, when we find out that we've been correct all along, we do go batshit fucking crazy, and it is warranted. And I agree. Like they lie to you, they tell you you're crazy, and then you find out you were right, and you're like, you made me feel crazy. But I'm sorry. She needs to accept that she did not want to have to face her own personal failures and lack of direction. And instead, she was like with this guy that she could go, well, this is what my future is. I'm dating this rich guy.
Yeah. And so then they break up, but not before he helps her pay for makeup artist school. So she does this makeup artist program that's $4,000. He pays for half of it. And then they break up and she's like, well, I feel really bad that you paid for half of makeup artist school. Can I pay you back? And he goes, oh yeah, I'd appreciate that. And she's like, oh.
And then she goes, I don't have $2,000 right now. And he goes, that's no problem. We'll do a sort of payment plan. How about you continue to cut my hair for free and I'll keep track of when it is edited up to $2,000, which feels quite generous and kind.
Yeah. So for the next 8 months, I cut Theo's hair every 5 weeks. He was always friendly, talking to me about work or that week's episode of The Bachelor. When I finished the haircut, he would pull out a slip of paper from his desk. At the top, it said $2,000. Each time he would write -40 and place the paper back in his desk. It was humiliating.
Why is it humiliating? I actually think it's more humiliating to just like this actually feels like the first reasonable thing you've done this whole book where you're like, I'm going to take my skills and like earn something.
So finally, her friends are like, this is crazy. So she calls him and says, I have a hard time feeling that you need this money as much as I do. He did not protest.
It was not money. You were not giving him money. Every 5 weeks for 8 months. So she gave him 6 haircuts and then go, this is crazy. Everyone thinks what you're doing to me is crazy. I guess I'm like, this feels like the least crazy thing I've heard. And if you didn't want to do it, you said, I don't want to do it anymore. And then he said, fine. This was like a thing he did for you to make you feel better about the money you took from him. I just can't believe she told this story and thinks he comes off bad. Like, can you believe he paid for me to go to school? And then when I offered to pay him back, he said that's okay. And then figured out a reasonable talent-based payment plan that's like quite understanding. And then when I said I don't want to do this anymore, he said that's fine. Isn't he an asshole? I guess like, no.
He probably was an asshole. It's just not illustrated well here. So now she's in bracelet making class again. And she discusses her mom's anger. She gets older and realizes that her mom's anger often comes from fear.
She has a whole thing. She goes to the chapel and is like, I don't believe in God. How could you even believe there's a God? Anyway, I do believe in a spirit world and I believe in limbo and I believe in tarot readings and I believe like in a universal spirit that kind of takes care of all of us. But God, that's stupid. And I'm like, wow, deep stuff. You really should have stuck it out till the second semester of college. You would be blown away to find out almost every sophomore agrees with you.
So now she's a makeup artist. We're flashed back. She finishes cosmetology school and she's a makeup artist. And it turns out she hates being a makeup artist. I realized I hate being on set, waking up at 5 a.m. to spend 12 hours for essentially 1 hour of meaningful work. When the actors first sat in the makeup chair, everything else is touch-ups. It became soul-crushingly boring. And then she gets this job with Men's Italian Vogue.
Oh my God, this is the craziest story of all time. So she walks in and she goes, do I need anything? They go, no, just a haircut, just men's grooming. So she walks in as the hairdresser on set. And it's this woman who's sitting there being like, everyone steals my ideas because I'm such a genius. And Anna's like, God, what a bitch. And then she goes to give the haircut. And then the woman comes in and goes, I think we should do like a long wig on you, which is like crazy, but whatever. That's what she wants. And Anna's like, I don't have any wigs. They said it was just basic grooming. And the woman freaks out at her and yells at her, blah, blah, blah. And listen, I'm not condoning when people yell on set. Like, I think it's crazy to yell over a fashion suit. I think most jobs, unless I think it's like surgery and somebody is eating a donut when they're supposed to be doing surgery.
Especially a powdered donut over an open body. My God.
I think that calls for exclaim and urgency. And I think, honestly, a good talking to.
Do you know how leaky the powder is?
I mean, and the crumbs and your spittle. In that scenario, I get that a boss has to yell. In every other scenario, I'm like, who even cares, you guys? But the way that Anna is telling the story like she is the victim of all victims, I'm like, yeah, you're doing hair for a Vogue photo shoot. This is what it takes to be a professional. I don't know what's standard, but I'm going to guess that if you were to ask most hairdressers, they'd be like, oh, I come over prepared. I remember watching a clip from the cutting room floor and Rachel is interviewing Cara something. She's Hailey Bieber and Justin Bieber's stylist.
Was it Carla Welch?
Yes. And she's like, what do you do if somebody doesn't like what you brought? She goes, oh, I always overpack. I overprepare. She goes, like, I bring so much stuff that there's no way that could happen. The name of the game is preparation. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's why you're at the top of the field. And that's why Anna only made it a year. To cry because you were unprepared and you felt like you asked the question. That's welcome to life, bitch. This is what it is to be in Vogue. Like, I don't know. I have no pity for you. I'm sorry that you learned a lesson a hard way. And then the next time you came more prepared, probably. But unfortunately, you never do anything after it gets hard. So you didn't learn the lesson. The way that she doesn't see this as like a typical job learning curve. And I guess that's because she's never really had a job and never had to support herself and never had to see something through. So she doesn't know that this is like a story that everybody has. And like you look back and go, ugh, I had no idea what I was doing back then. I was so unprepared. And not like, can you believe they were mean to me at Vogue? Yes, I can. That's their fucking thing.
I've seen The Devil Wears Prada. So then she's like, okay, actually makeup artisting is not for me. She starts a makeup blog and it does okay. And someone's like, why don't you do on-air beauty content? But she's not enthusiastic enough and she doesn't get any of the auditions. But then she finds this DVD about making lamps and she starts designing Victorian lampshades. And she loves doing work by hand and having no one yell at her. I guess that's kind of the origins of her artistic career.
Well, she had gone to one semester of photography school
okay.
after the Vidal Sassoon situation. But she said she dropped out because it turns out having the academic part of photo taking was really boring to her and it killed her drive.
Totally.
Unfortunately, the truth of you is you are a kept woman who like identifies as a feminist. And so all of your life's discontent is the room in the middle where you're like figuring out why you're so unfulfilled and you're like, men are mean. Mostly it's you. I think you're just unfulfilled because your life is too easy.
Sprinkle, sprinkle. So she's making lampshades and posting them on Instagram and people are getting really into them. And I think it probably has to do with the fact that she has probably like some notable followers because of her time dating the founder of College Humor.
Okay, I'm not sure, but I think I've heard that she was part of like very much an It Tumblr crowd.
Okay.
Like I think at this time, her makeup blog on Tumblr was big. And I do think it was big. And I do think she was part, like, you know, I'm back when there would be groups of friends and you knew them all. And there was all these kind of like different circles of characters. I think she was
in one
part of a cool group.
Okay.
And the way that there's all those girls that graduated from Vogue and now one of them works at Bumble. And
yeah,
there's sometimes friendship groups that are like kind of it girls.
Yes. And there are a handful that you just like randomly see and you're like, oh my God, I stalked that girl on Instagram for 10 hours 15 years ago. So she's one of those.
And you're like, and you're her cousin?
So she's making her lampshades. It's going pretty well. She also gets a little baby bulldog named Petunia. This is June 2013. She loves Petunia more than anything. I relate. I get it. I feel you here.
She does say, and I respect this, that she's like, as soon as Petunia dies, I will take up anti-bulldog breeding advocacy because she's like, Petunia's so fucked up. I didn't realize this should be illegal.
Yeah.
She's like, this one's already alive, so we must protect her at all costs, but no more.
Petunia also has like really bad resource guarding issues, which I don't feel like she tried to train out. She just used an animal communicator to try to explain to Petunia that she shouldn't bite people when they take her stuff.
Unfortunately, the familiar feeling of boredom eventually saturated my lampshade making, as it had with everything that came before, but at least doing this, I never had to leave Petunia.
Okay, so now she's back in the hospital. She's back for another exit procedure, and she has to call and break up with Dr. Carr with the help of her other therapists. It feels more like a breakup between two friends than a doctor and patient, and perhaps I realize in this moment, that's why it needs to end.
So she ends it and it's all well and good. Dr. Carr seems like she's going to let her out easy.
And then Dr. Carr starts taking fucking swipes.
So she goes, I must tell you, Anna, you really had those men wrapped around your finger in that outtake meeting the other day. I got to hand it to you. And she's like, what? And then she goes, I was like, damn, she really knows how to work a room of men.
Now I'm furious, so angry my body feels hot and I can tell I'm about to cry. Should I point out that there was a female social worker in the meeting too who had the exact same reaction? Perhaps a stronger reaction than the male doctors? Should I yell at her, unleash my rage? Should I let her see me cry? Should I make her explain herself?
That I am manipulative, but specifically manipulative of men, is not something that has ever been suggested by Dr. Carr in our 5 years together, even as I recounted my strained, confusing, and outright maddening relationships with Ethan, Julian, Brian, Sam, and Theo. I will likely hear these words. You really had those men wrapped around your finger, replay in my mind over and over long after this meeting ends. I cannot believe she's talking about Ethan and Julian and Brian in therapy.
At 36.
Imagine at 36 being like, well, in 7th grade, I went to Abercrombie to meet this boy I thought who liked me and he didn't like me. You're going through a divorce. We have to move on.
I guess the other thing is that in this session, in this 10, how long was she there? Like 14 days?
10 days.
10 days. During any of this time, did we discuss her like eating disorder?
I don't think so. She just acts like she's eating and it's gone. But to get down to 81 pounds, which is what she was at when she was let in, that's like not nothing.
It's also something that she like specifically emphasizes her thinness, her eating disorder, her this. Like she talks about the way that she had, I mean, eating disorders are very comparative diseases. So she tells you how she won and then she never explains how she got out.
She treats it like a game of hide and seek. Like, oh, now I'm done. You found me. Like it literally was like an attention of hide and seek. So now that she's been found and sent to help, she's done playing the game of anorexia.
So now she's out of the hospital. She finishes her breakup with Dr. Carr. The other doctors are like, great job. You're all set up for your exit and you're going to do great. Her mom meets her with Petunia. She hugs Petunia and gives her a smooch.
She says, I love my mom. Like, I realize that she's a person beyond being my mom. There's a whole history before me and a life she thought she'd have, child-free, working in fashion, living in New York City. Instead, she ended up a stay-at-home mom who cooked dinner every night and carted her children to their activities. She never held that against me. Instead, she made her whole life about my brother and me. I do think she held it against you. Wasn't that what the screaming was about?
Yeah.
Wasn't there a whole trauma about you not being allowed to audition because she didn't want to have to like give up more of her life?
So now she's an outpatient doing DBT over Zoom. She texts her friends. They're happy that she's out of the hospital. In her therapy group, there's this guy named Eric who hates his bitch ex-wife, and she is so triggered by Eric, but she uses her DBT processes to help her like center and be like, I don't know Eric's story because he's also in this therapy group. He might also be going through something. And I said, that's progress, my friend.
She starts taking photos. She thinks they're coming out good.
Self-portraits. She photographs herself to remind herself that she exists.
And now she's having a fight with this boy, Reese. He says, they said you're crazy. They also said your comment was a godless and soulless thing to say, and I agree with them. This fight is about the fact that she said if she were to have children, she doesn't think she'd want boy children, only girl children, because she doesn't know how to raise boy children because she hates men so much. And now he's fighting with her.
So Reese is a 28-year-old man that she is dating. The first relationship she's been in since leaving the hospital 9 months ago. She's been taking self-portraits.
And very successful. She goes to these art fairs and she's the highest grossing artist in the history of the fair.
Which has nothing to do with her front page of the tabloid's divorce, I'm sure.
Well, in the way that Paris Hilton is the highest grossing DJ and therefore the best DJ.
Why does it matter then?
So she's on the apps. She starts going on horrible dates. I will say, these sound like not even the worst dates I've heard of.
I've been on some dates, man.
She's like, I went on a date with a man who kept his dog in a crate during sex because he said the dog got too bad separation anxiety if he was in a different room and he just put a towel over the dog. Anyway, so she dates this guy and he's totally cool with the fact that she was in a hospital. So they fall in love. And it turns out there was tons of signs that he sucks. And then she doesn't drop till later that he's 28. And I'm like, well, okay, that's crazy. Why did you think it would work with a 28-year-old? And then she goes through all the men who kind of treat her like shit.
I wanted Reese to like me, not be mad at me. They like have these miscommunications where they really get fired up around each other. I caught myself in the mirrored wall adjacent to the bed, mascara running, fingertips orange from eating chips, water dribbles staining my shirt. How the fuck did I get here? I said to my reflection. Where? Where are you? Just on a date?
At a hotel after a date. Then it turns out that comment where he's like, all my friends said you're crazy and soulless and godless.
He made up.
He's like, yeah, they didn't say that. They said that they thought what you said was extreme, but I made up the words, but I'm sorry. I took it too far. And she keeps dating him. And I'm like, wow, you have like no self-respect.
She also says that he hates her photography.
He calls it performative.
Which it is.
But you shouldn't date some young man in their 20s who says that to you.
Even as it was happening, I couldn't understand why I was defending myself to a 28-year-old man who had no idea what it took to research and write an academic thesis. So he also doesn't like her thesis. And it's like, you shouldn't date someone who's this critical of your work. Her friends are like, you're allowed to hate men. What the fuck is wrong with that guy?
Just IVF. She says she never wanted to be a mom. When she realized she didn't have to be a mom, from that day forward, I never really wanted to. And then she realizes that I don't know, she gets very nervous about if she'll be left out of things. I know mothers feel excluded from life. I guess that's the paradox of being a woman. No matter what path you choose, chances are you'll feel invisible. And I guess this is why I felt so personally frustrated with this book, because she paints this portrait of being a woman as every single one of us is the most pathetic, lonely, held back, insecure, miserable being. And I am I don't know, ladies, speak for yourself. I guess I'm a woman and I think my life is pretty good. I'm not going to sit here and say there's no such thing as a patriarchy and there isn't sexism, but to sit here and act like every path a woman takes is that of the invisible, I don't know. It's so fucked up to act like no woman could possibly have a fulfilling good life or no woman could be happy with her choices.
It just feels very depressing to read this book where she's essentially resigned to every path a woman takes is a path that leads to loneliness.
But she's not resigned to it. She's pushing it.
She's pushing it. And also that we essentially have no free will. There is no choice you could make that would lead you to a better life. You are but a woman in this world. And so you have to just deal with the fact that it sucks.
I guess I am I don't know, men don't make me feel as bad as they make you feel because I just don't give them that much power. You could try it.
Yeah. I mean, I am literally a single woman in my 30s out here dating. And you just have to decide that men don't determine your value. And it's not easy.
It's not easy, but I feel you do a good job of being dating right now sucks. You have a ton of male friends. You have a brother. But you don't sit here and go, well, men don't like me, so I'm worthless.
Yeah, I just don't think I am worthless. Also, I think people do like me.
Yeah.
That's the thing is I think people like me. I have male friends that like me. I'm just not in a relationship right now. I have girlfriends who like me.
To her, that's nothing.
If I go on a date and that date doesn't become the perfect marriage, I'm not well, what's my value in this society?
And I think that's what's frustrating is that is her belief system. But the way that she is well, that's all of us. And that's the only way. And we have to feel that way. And I'm speak for yourself.
Yeah. I'm that is a depressing thing to say. Don't put that on me.
Exactly.
So she's very worried about all of her friends having kids and her being left behind. And so she decides to do IVF.
She talks about how she recently found out that she's allergic to latex condoms, and they found out by accident when Reese used a non-latex condom. It was my first time in my entire life that sex wasn't painful. I was so conditioned to believe pleasurable sex wasn't for women that for 20 years I did not even think to complain or question the pain. Turns out it wasn't a me problem, it was a latex problem and a patriarchal problem.
We had Sex in the City in 1995.
You didn't think any woman on earth was enjoying sex? That is such a crazy thing. I understand that sex is easier for men, that we're conditioned to please them first. But I do think that there is a general conversation that the female orgasm is real. You think it's a myth? I also don't understand. She has so many friends. You've never once casually brought up oh, you know how sex is always painful no matter what? And nobody said, wait, that's not right.
I mean, you were married. You weren't talking about sex in your marriage.
Nobody between you and John Mulaney had ever been should we look into this? I just don't understand. Let me tell you, if you're a woman listening to this podcast and sex hurts every time, you must go to a doctor. And if that doctor doesn't take you seriously, which they might not because the medical system does not trust women, go to a second doctor. But that's not right. And you need to know
it should not always hurt.
What do you mean you lived in New York City and you had never heard about pleasurable sex?
Insane. In the New York City art scene.
And that's what I mean. I was just these are choices you're making to be women's lives suck. I'm not saying we have a lot of progress, but we've had some.
There's been a bit.
We've heard about the clitoris.
So she's doing IVF. She spills one of the bottles of medicine and it costs her $1,000 to replace.
She learns about putting her face in ice. That's helpful. They get 4 eggs to freeze and she feels really bad about herself. So she decides to do a second cycle of IVF. But when she's trying it, they find another cyst and she has to wait for it to go away. And she just never really goes back.
Then her friend Carmel says that she is pregnant and she turns this into a whole thing about why do most of her friends tell her last or why didn't Carmel tell her first? It turns out Sarah knew longer than she did. And she's I just don't want you guys to think that you can't tell me things. I'm afraid there won't be room for me. and that I won't be a part of your life anymore. I don't know.
I guess I will say these are almost relatable conversations. I think it is very true that fear of like growing up, and it's the family question is such a big life differentiator between women and like, but the irony is she's the one who moved alone to Connecticut. Like if anything's going to like hamper a friendship, she's like, I don't want to feel isolated because I don't have a baby. Anyway, I go days without speaking to anyone. But I do think this is such a real conversation. And she's like, I don't want my friends to feel that they can't tell me that they're pregnant because they think I'll be like mad they're abandoning me by having a baby, or I'll be sad because I'm not having one. And she's like, because I love them and I'm happy for them. But of course I am a little bit mad and I am a little bit sad. And I think those are very real things. I just feel that unfortunately coming out of this book, you go, well, of course they can't tell you. You're like not somebody who can handle information. You're somebody who's been bursting out sobbing at like on every page. And she's like, I wonder if there wasn't room for their good news because I was so sad. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, you are a unique case in this situation about why people, your friends, felt they couldn't open up to you. That I think negates like the larger, more interesting, more universal conversation of taking different life paths and figuring out how to make it work.
Yeah.
She dates a guy named Javier who love bombs her, then ghosts her. And then a month later, he's like, do you want to hang out again? And she says yes, even though he like treated her like shit and she spent 2 weeks crying.
They had sex. We both make a lot of noise, but we're just putting on a show for each other. You're 36 years old. You can't just be having sex to put on a show. Literally, the whole fun of dating in your 30s is that you like know how to have sex good and it's fun for you.
She just found out about it, Ashley.
Yeah, but she's not even doing it.
So she's going on this walk with this guy who's already fully ghosted her and then texted her out of the blue and been like, want to hang out again? And she said yes. And she suddenly has this
epiphany.
She goes, what if I stopped caring so much about whether or not he liked me and started wondering, do I like him? Which I will say, Ashley made fun of Tinks's book on our Patreon. But I said, I think there's people out there who need to hear this question.
I'm wrong.
Ladies, next time you're on a date, ask, do I like him?
Do you want him to text? Do you want him to text you? Do you want to text him? Because you can text first.
She's like, he's the kind of person I could be friends with. I'm like, friends with? He treated you like shit. He asked you to spend your birthday together and then ditched you the day before and said, I'm too busy and stopped texting you back. Why would you want to be friends with this guy? It's so funny because she's like, when we hung out, I asked if he would put his jacket down on the grass so I didn't get my pants dirty. And he says no. And she's like, the next time we hung out, I brought my own blanket. I'm like, yeah, but you're still hanging out with this guy who is pretty fucked up to you. I don't think we're making the progress you think you're making.
I have chased unrequited affection because to me, struggle is indicative of love. But this is not how I want to do love anymore. Well, that's because that's not love. Petunia dies, which is very sad. It is like literally all she has. I hate when people do a very detailed walkthrough of putting a dog. This is really, I had to skip most of this. I can't handle it. And then we end and she's like, I'm writing this memoir. I'm looking out the window and I realized I never read my full comprehensive review from my hospital stay 2 months ago. And she looks at it and 2 years ago. Sorry, I meant 2 years ago. And so she looks at it and she's like, I don't agree with anything they said. She says, the report is quite short, only 18 pages. How complicated did you think you were? You think it should be longer than 18 pages? That's longer than this book should have been. She goes, they got a lot of things I said wrong. Like they asked her, had you ever written a suicide note? And she had one time, but then she ripped it up and like threw it out. And they said that she didn't. She doesn't like the use of the word denies. She denies she has ADHD. She denies that she uses recreational substances. I wonder if that's just a medical requirement because at the end of the day, you cannot say definitively she does or does not, especially when you're working with somebody who's like self-reporting. Yeah, she's self-reporting symptoms. And so I wonder if she's just like being offended by typical medical jargon. Yeah, I felt that was the case. And then they have this bombshell. One wonders if it may be possible that on the surface, she's ready to reject men as a group, but perhaps at a deeper level, her rage towards maternal figures may be far more powerful. And she's like, how fucking dare you say, oh, she hates men, but it must be a woman's fault in the first place. I will say she's so mad at her mom and she won't acknowledge it. And she knows that the whole book is about how mad she is at her mom. I mean, you said this 100 pages ago. You said, it's so random that this whole book is about how much she hates men when the person she hates most is her mom. And to this day, when she claims she likes her mom, she still doesn't even like her mom. She's like mad that when her mom's there for Petunia's death, she's like, can I come on a walk with you too? And she's like, no, but fine. Because the problem is what she's mad at is herself. She is mad at her mom because she feels her mom started this pattern for her where her mother was a talented woman who was told you're not allowed to be talented. You must be a stay-at-home mother. So her wings were clipped and she had to live dependent on a man. It's interesting that one of the big problems in her parents' marriage was that her mom was always mad that her dad didn't let her spend more money. So Anna took that and she went in and she took all of what she thought was exceptionalism, all of her
supposed grandiosity. And she found these men who had tons of money and were like living very fulfilling, creative success stories. And she glommed onto them, and then she felt bad for herself because she's like, I can't finish anything. I have nothing to my name except for a rich man, and I hate men. You don't hate men. To this day, you're turning to Javier and saying, do you like me now? Do you like me now? You're asking a 28-year-old man who lives in a East Village walk-up for notes on your fucking thesis. You're obsessed with male validation. What you hate is yourself for needing it, and you blame your mom for putting that seed in you. And let me tell you, you don't know yourself as well as you think you do. And that's why this book low-key sucks. You're obsessed with yourself. You think everyone's looking at you. Literally work retail for 40 hours a week. It will snap you out of this so fucking fast. I just think you have coddled and boredomed yourself into nothing. There's never been grit. You have no grit.
She has convinced herself that every whim is like a deep dive worth exploring. And the problem is that she has the money to do so.
Yes. She is Yolanda Hadid, but emotionally.
And then she goes on this diatribe with like all the hack bullshit. Women displaying anger, even acknowledging anger, are deemed pathological.
So she goes, the whole problem with men is that they think they're neutral. They can't even believe that I would be so upset about the patriarchy. You're not that upset about the patriarchy. But can I tell you something? There are women who live lives in their communes. If you hated men this much, you would have like figured out a different way to live outside of like suckling at the teat of a man.
I can't help but laugh at how his suggestion, the final report, makes me seem like an unhappy 1950s housewife who needs to be kept under control. The sad, devastating truth of your life is that you are an unhappy housewife.
This whole life story of yours was told boyfriend to boyfriend, as opposed to like your own life story. I mean, stop looking at it through the lens of men. And I think I exactly said that when this book was announced, and I said it was called Men Have Called Her Crazy. I'm like, when you look at your life through like what men have prescribed to you, that is a choice you are making.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, but like break free.
And that's the thing, is we do live in a society that tells women from the day they're born, you will find a husband. You must find a husband. You will grow up to like be the wife of a family. But we all live in the world and you can make choices.
I guess I feel like, as someone who obviously I also live in a patriarchal society, someone wrote into Worm to the Wise, which is an advice column we do every month on the Patreon, and said like, how do you handle when older men don't take your profession seriously or they don't take what you do seriously? And I was just like, oh, I don't know. That's not a problem I have encountered in years. I guess my dad really loves me. So that would be like the one problem, and I'm lucky for that. But I'm like, I don't know. If a man doesn't know how big podcasting is, that's on him. He's an idiot. I live a life where like my income comes from the audience of this podcast, which is 96% women. My boss is a woman. My employees are all women. That's Ashley too, and Bug. Like, I don't know. I guess I have cultivated this niche in comedy where it's like for women, by women, starring women. And of course, men exist, but I'm like, I guess I have figured out a way to have it like not dominate my life. So I know it's possible.
Yeah, I've had men not take me seriously because of my job, and it used to bother me. And then I realized, oh my God, why would it? My life is awesome.
Yeah, I don't know. You at some point have to like build something in yourself. I will say building something in yourself comes from like building something, you have to find something you're proud of that you made. I don't care if it's a lampshade, but you have to make like 20 more lampshades. You have to finish the lampshade project.
That's the thing, is it doesn't come to you. You have to come to it. You have to push past. The problem is that there are cringe moments, embarrassing moments in everything. You have to push through to find your own center. You can't expect people to like bestow a title and an importance upon you.
I think her problem is that she sees herself as an artist, but you have now cycled through about 10 different art forms and you get bored with all of them. So maybe you have to accept that you're not an artist. Maybe there's something else you like to do, but maybe your purpose on this planet is something you don't love. Maybe you just don't have a passion like that. And that kind of sucks, but it's true for a lot of people. Maybe you have no sense of what you actually like and you have to stop lying to yourself.
I feel like a really dishonest thing about this book and about like the societal conversation around Marie Tendler is that she did forge a path in art by her own right.
The amount of people who are like, I didn't even know about John Mulaney. I had only ever heard of the lampshade.
It's
like,
just not true. She did create sort of like a hollow figure that is herself, that any woman who's ever been treated poorly by a man that everyone else thinks is a nice, good guy can relate to. Like anytime a woman has been treated badly by a guy that everyone else in the room says, oh, he's the best, they looked to Marie Tendler and said, she's the beacon of our experience.
Well, I think part of it is because, I mean, and ironically, not to be like everything that Marie Tendler roads lead back to men, but part of what was so heartbreaking is that for years, we had heard about how great their love was.
Yes.
Like we had a parasocial relationship with their relationship because of the storytelling and narrative and world building of John Mulaney.
Yeah.
He broke our mirage of their perfect marriage and she walked away with the reputation. But like the reputation came from a marriage that I don't know ever existed. Because when you look at the timeline of this relationship, which comes in bits and pieces through this book, they were clearly living separate lives during COVID. She was in Connecticut. He was obviously relapsing in New York City. That's not her fault, but they were living separate lives. And then you think for 6 months before that, she was living in Washington, D.C. So they were separate back then too. Like how long had they been living separate lives? So this whole idea that they had this perfect relationship. Also, I will say, post breakup, she really hit home this narrative that they didn't have kids because of him. And now she was doing IVF because she had been like left in her prime and unable to fulfill her dream of children. She's the one that didn't want kids.
The problem is she has woven a life that is so held up by like male tent poles. It's actually impressive. I think it's good that you were able to turn it into a book deal and an art career. Congratulations.
And I bet she feels a lot better. And it has nothing to do with the boys she's dating. It has to do with the fact that like she has something to her name so she doesn't have to feel ashamed of herself. I don't think that shame was all misdirected. I think some of it was like valid that she was like, I'm 35 with every opportunity in the world and I've done nothing.
Yeah.
It's really hard on your self-esteem to not have followed through. And I've been there. And like the only way to get through it is to like bits and pieces show up for yourself when things are hard and then prove it to yourself and then learn to like yourself because of it. And me and people I know and love, I've seen all of us, like that's what growing up is. It's like getting so frustrated with feeling bad about yourself. And I feel like the self-sabotaging of it all where you want to do something, you're not that good at it, you get mad at yourself, so you give up, you call it boredom, whatever. It doesn't come as easily as you thought it would. It's not coming with the praise you thought it would. So you give up and now you don't have the fortitude that you need, which is also its own muscle that you must build in order to succeed at anything. And then you feel worse and worse and worse about yourself. At some point, you just have to like work on it.
And that's not to dismiss that she probably does have very real mental health issues. She does have depression. She does have anxiety, and that makes it harder. But to say that it takes her out of the game entirely is like unfair to herself, and it's unfair to anyone else who struggles with those things.
Yeah. And I think to say it's all the external world, it's not me, it's the systems I was born into.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we'll talk more about this on the Patreon. We'll get into it. Thanks for listening to our rant. Sorry if we were too harsh.
Yeah. Sorry, Anna Marie, if you're listening. Claire, how fertile would you say this soil is?
I like want to give it like a 3.8.
I would give it less. I feel like there's not a lot here.
It's everything she has to give. I think you can get a lot out of it. I mean, she gives you everything in her head. Just because she doesn't know doesn't mean you can't know.
Yeah. How many worm teenies would you have with her?
I literally can't imagine a worse person to be around for me personally. I would have a really hard time with her personally, I think.
Oh, same. But do you know who I would like to be around?
Our 5-star reviewers.
This episode was brought to you by One Protein Bars, the perfect snack for when that craving strikes, when you need a mid-afternoon sweet treat, but you want something that is going to fill you up and keep you satisfied until supper time. One Protein Bars come in incredible flavors like Reese's Peanut Butter Lovers, cookies and cream. They are so delicious and have 18 grams of protein per bar, and they are my favorite thing that we keep inside of this office, including the books. We wouldn't be able to read books if it wasn't for protein bars, if I'm being completely honest with you. So thank you to One Protein Bars for sponsoring this episode. You can find One Protein Bars at your local retailer or at Amazon.com.